Now, this is the original radiator out of the A3 that we've plucked so many other bits and pieces from, and in theory it's brilliant. It has wiring adapters that plug directly into our loom and talk to our ECU, so that's all great. It's obviously designed to cool our engine, which is also great, and it has integrated fans and shrouds and everything, so it would all be wonderful if it wasn't for the fact that the front of our car is really, really small compared to an A3. Now you might be sitting there thinking, but Chris, is a really obvious answer to this, just tip it forwards. And you're not wrong, tipping it forwards obviously does make it lower. The problem is now, we have to go so far forwards because it's so tall, that pulling it up through the radiator is a kind of a nightmare. We don't think it'll cool very well. And our top hose is still exiting upwards, which is still a problem for vertical clearance. Not to mention, it's so wide that building any structure out of the front of this to support the front end bodywork and the bumper and stuff is just completely impossible. So this, unfortunately, will not work.
So we started looking through eBay, and there's a lot of very low profile ones, but they're very wide, and there's a lot of narrow ones, but they're very tall, which doesn't really help us. Now eventually I was looking around and I found a listing for a 944 radiator, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if we just used the one out of the Porsche that we fitted in episode 24? We put this in front of the car, just to see where it would fit. It actually fits alarmingly well. And the one that's listed on eBay is for a turbo or 3 litre, so it'll definitely have enough heat capacity. And actually measuring this one, it's about 30% thicker, so it should be perfect for what we need. Now there is one minor problem with using this radiator. It doesn't have any physical mounting points that are screws onto the chassis or onto the slam panel or anything. It has these little 4 compression points, which if you watched us do the swap on episode 24, you'd see it's just a little rubber bushing that clamps into the slam panel top and bottom, and it sits in place nicely. That's fine, we can replicate that relatively easily, but we'll need to build the structure that those clamps go onto. If we're doing that, we need to start looking at the very front of the car, and actually if we're going to put a crash member in here, how we're going to attach that onto the car as well. If we're lucky, we'll be able to mount this onto the crash member and not have to build 2 different sets of structure that are going to intersect. It can all just be one piece which will bolt on and off the front of the car, so it's replaceable if we ever touch something with the front. So to build the crash structure, we need some sort of large, solid beam across the front, and we happen to have one still kicking around from when we stripped the A3 apart. Now in terms of positioning this, we need to make sure that we're not going to interfere with the wheels. So if we have it back here, when the wheels turn, we're going to have a bad day. So it needs to be far enough forward that we avoid it when it's unlocked. So Chris just spins the wheels each direction. You can see that in this spot, we do reasonably well. Probably actually end up a little bit further forward, but we just need to build a nice little structure that comes from the back of here into the top of here. Now this feels like a huge amount of overhang off the front of the chassis, but that's just because it stops so close to the front axle. The difference in front of the tyres is only about 7 or 8 inches. And you compare that to the A3, which is about 19 in front of the tyres to the very front of the car, we're still very short. It just feels like a lot of room, which at least means we've got a lot of space to mount the radiator and anything else we need to put in the very front of the car. Whatever we're going to build to hold the radiator and hold the bumper onto the car, we're going to need to be able to bolt on and off so that we can replace it and get better access if needs be. So we've made 4 of these little plates and we're going to mount these into the corners like this. Another one will go across the front, a bolt runs through and mounts them together. We're also going to do the same at the bottom and probably in the middle where we mount some sort of cross brace across here. We've got the mounts on the chassis and we've drilled and bolted up our mounts for the back of this, so now we need to join the 2 of these together and we need to position this where we want it off the front of the car.
We've been playing with our collection of clamps again. This time the scaffolding that we've built is to support the radiator in kind of a prototype position here, just to give us some idea of how far forward it has to tip and how far forward it reaches out the front of the car and how much room it gives us before our crash bar. So we're going to iterate here a little bit. We're going to sort of shuffle the radiator around, see where we can fit the crash bar, make sure it doesn't catch the wheels, and then sort of wash, rinse, repeat, and make sure everything plays well together. Now you can see we've deployed pretty much every single G-clamp we own, once again building the scaffolding. It's a bit more ridiculous than the last one we built, I'll be honest, but it has done a really good job. We've got the crash bar at the front of the car now, perfectly parallel with our rear firewall, which is one of the few datums that we have on the car, things that we actually believe are right, and we've been basing a lot off of that. So we've got it parallel on the front, we're pretty happy with where it's sitting. The only thing we've got to check now is that when we throw some steering angle on, we don't get too close to it. So, let's check both sides. Aid, if you could. So that all seems pretty good. Now that we've got the crash bar in place, we can start tying everything together. So we've got these little metal clamps on the front of the body here. They bolt on and off, and we've got the metal plates on the back of the bumper. So all we need to do now is put some great big box section in between the pair of them, and that is the first of our bumper brackets done. Well, here's our crash structure so far. Now, it's only the outside of it. We were expecting in all our earlier designs of it to have a diagonal brace running along it so that we can't do this and tweak the whole thing out of alignment. Might not seem too bad now, but when we're out on track and we've got a whole front end bolted to this thing, it'll be hanging around all over the place. We need to stiffen it up a bit more, which means putting in some diagonal bracing, either all the way across corner to corner, or perhaps just from both front corners into the centre, which would be a bit more work, but would be a bit more strong. But before we can do that, we need to get the radiator in so that we know where it's going to sit and whether it will get in the way of any of the bars that we're looking at putting in place.
Now, obviously we're not going to use this radiator that we were mocking up with because it is in terrible condition, which is why we took it out of the Porsche to start with. So we've ordered this lovely 3-core off eBay. It's an all aluminium unit, aluminium end tanks as opposed to the plastic ones that were on the old one, and it should fit in almost perfectly. The tabs on the ends are slightly different, so we're just going to have to shave those down, and then we'll get on to building.
Well, this is our radiator more or less in place, where it's going to be 4 reels, and the mounting system for it is actually fairly simple. We've managed to come up with a pretty good system, I like to think, albeit very different from the 944. The weight of the radiator and all the water in it is going to be supported by a small shelf that we run underneath, that's supported by some box section. Now the shelf we're going to make more or less the same way we did the shelf for the pedal box, where we take some box section and cut it apart across its diagonal. That's going to be permanently fixed to the chassis. That's going to take the weight, and then to actually hold the radiator down onto that and stop it from kind of jumping off of it, we're going to have a couple of little tongues that bolt onto the back of the shroud and hold everything in place. And with that out of the way, we'll then be able to move on to figuring out what we do at the top.
So now we've got the cradle in for the radiator, we've put it in, propped it up on this G-clamp, and you can see that this support is not going to work going across this way into that corner or into the centre, because it's going to get right in the way of this pipe. So we'll be going this way, and this lateral cross member will go from corner to corner, and it's going to miss all of the pipes that we need it to, which is great news. In order to mount the top of the radiator, we're going to use more 1/2 inch, and we're going to go straight across the top of these mounts, edge to edge, and join them together. So it'll make this a little bit easier to get off as one piece, and it'll give us plenty of room to mount the top of the radiator onto this in a nice easy fashion. So they've just finished up cutting our cross member after a lot of trial and error, and this fits in round this way, across here, between the top 2 corners. Now this is going to stop the whole thing pivoting left and right and flexing against the chassis. So this will hold it nice and parallel. Get this tacked in, and then we can start putting in the cross member for the top of the radiator. Now the brackets for the top of the radiator, we were going to show you how we're going to make those, and we started playing around with a few bits of metal and welding things together, and we sort of accidentally ended up building our brackets, absolutely, completely, to the end. We didn't want to just waste time making them again on camera, because we only need 2, so this is the bracket we've got. A little sandwich that goes over the top lip on the radiator, and we're just going to bolt through into that, so it'll pinch it down, and then this tab goes onto the cross member that we just welded in. Now we've just got to drill a hole in the radiator to match the hole in each of the tabs, and then drill a hole in the top to match the cross member, and we're all done. Now we've got the bumper back on, that means that we've got all of this framework finished. We've now got a radiator and it's all mounted nicely, which is good news. If you'd like to check out some of the other things we've been working on, the Thunderbird, the SD1, the Golf, which we've not set on fire again, that would be great. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, that'd be awesome. Thanks for watching.
I'm pretty sure this should be beefy enough that we actually can just lift the front by it.
I hope so. Like it should.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.